Before Frankenstein, real scientists played God, crossing lines that should never be crossed, unleashing horrors that history tried to forget. These were the true mad scientists whose experiments with life and death twisted the boundaries of nature itself. What drove them to this madness? What did they unleash in their pursuit of knowledge? Let's begin with the first stirrings of fear, the moment science stepped into the darkness. It all started in the 1500s with Paracelsus, a man whose obsession with immortality would lead him down a terrifying path. In the shadowed villages of Switzerland, whispers spread about a physician and alchemist whose ambition went beyond the realm of possibility. Paracelsus was renowned for his medical expertise, but it was his relentless quest to conquer death that set him apart from others. He believed that humans could transcend the inevitable end of mortality. He believed that he could conquer death, transcending the very nature of life itself. Paracelsus was no ordinary man. His mind was consumed with the idea that humans could escape the inevitable end of mortality. He sought to unlock secrets buried deep within alchemy, chemistry, and ancient mystical teachings, hoping to find a way to cheat death. His legend grew as his experiments became increasingly strange. The villagers spoke of unnatural lights flickering from his workshop, of strange, pungent smells wafting through the air on dark nights. But what they feared most was the constant whisper that Paracelsus was attempting something far darker than anyone could comprehend. He wasn't just a doctor. He was a man who believed that life could be manipulated, even created, from nothing. Then came the unsettling discovery. One night, the village was rocked by a chilling event. The graves were found torn open, the bodies face down in the soil. The scene was horrifying. The earth had been disturbed, and the bodies, once at rest, were thrown aside as if something or someone had disturbed them. The villagers were terrified. Some claimed that the bodies had been disinterred for some purpose, but no one could fathom why or how it happened. Paracelsus, however, was rumored to be the source of these strange happenings. His obsession with immortality had driven him to disturb the natural order of life and death itself. But what exactly was he doing in the solitude of his laboratory? The answers were as unsettling as the events unfolding in the village. Paracelsus had begun conducting experiments on life and death. He believed that death was merely a disease, one that could be cured with the right knowledge. He scoured ancient texts, translating the works of mystics and alchemists who had long been forgotten. With his hands stained by dark potions and chemicals, he sought a way to master life, no longer satisfied with healing the sick, but determined to create life itself. His experiments became increasingly dangerous. Rumor had it that Paracelsus had been involved in the reanimation of animals, trying to breathe life back into creatures that had long since passed. But what if, in his obsession, he had gone even further? Some whispered that he had attempted to reanimate human corpses, test subjects for his twisted experiments. His thirst for knowledge had led him down a path of no return, one where science and the occult collided in a terrifying dance. And the villagers' fears were not without reason. Paracelsus, in his quest for power, had tampered with forces that were never meant to be understood by mortal men. Those bodies torn from their graves may not have been the work of a grave robber or some mindless thief. They may have been part of something darker, something far more sinister. But something else was stirring beneath the surface. In the ancient world, there was a time when the boundary between life and death was not so clearly defined. Alchemy, a mystical practice born from the desire to understand the natural world, became a powerful force that bridged the gap between the known and the unknown. The earliest origins of Paracelsus' obsession can be traced back to the belief that life itself was malleable, waiting to be controlled, perfected, and extended. These ideas were not new. They had been whispered in the shadows of ancient rituals for centuries. The golem of Jewish folklore is one of the earliest known myths surrounding the creation of life from nothing. In the stories, a rabbi uses a mixture of clay and sacred incantations to bring a golem to life, a creature of raw, unnatural power. It was said that this creature could be controlled by the rabbi's will, but once the ritual was completed, it could not be undone. The golem was a symbol of human desire to wield power over life, but it came with a terrible cost. In ancient Greece, myths like that of Prometheus painted a similar picture. He defied the gods to give fire to humanity, and in doing so, sparked not only an age of enlightenment, but also the wrath of the gods. His punishment was to be bound to a rock where an eagle would eat his liver each day, only for it to regenerate overnight. It was an endless cycle, much like the pursuit of immortality itself. Prometheus' crime wasn't just stealing fire. It was his attempt to elevate humanity, to give them the power to create life and control death. And like all such attempts, it came at an unforgivable cost. These ancient beliefs were not simply tales, they were rituals steeped in reverence, yet laced with subtle, ever-present unease. In the misty fields of medieval Europe, candlelit rituals were performed in secret, where alchemists and mystics sought the hidden truths of nature. They believed that through the right combination of ingredients, words, and symbols, they could achieve the impossible: eternal life, the transmutation of substances, and the creation of life itself. The air would be thick with incense, the soft flicker of candles casting shadows that danced across the walls of dimly lit rooms. The alchemists, cloaked in robes, would mix elixirs and powders, their whispers lost in the hum of ancient chants. They were driven by the promise of godlike power, their experiments seen as sacred trials, methods of unraveling the very fabric of life. To them, the idea of transcending death was not sacrilege. It was the culmination of human potential. But amid this reverence, there was an unsettling truth. Every ritual, every incantation carried a price. The human desire to control life was a hunger that could never be fully satisfied. The more these alchemists sought to master the secrets of immortality, the more they risked unleashing something darker, something beyond their control. The lines between science and the occult began to blur, and what had once been revered as sacred knowledge became a dangerous path of destruction. In the candlelit glow of their experiments, the alchemists didn't know it yet, but they were already stirring forces that would one day demand a price that no one could escape. As they gazed into their bubbling potions and drawn symbols, they unknowingly edged closer to the very horror that would mark the arrival of the mad scientist's curse. And with it, the ancient myth of creating life would evolve into something far darker than anyone could imagine. But in those quiet moments, it felt like there was nothing to fear. The misty fields, the candlelit rituals, the whispers in the dark, each gave the illusion of safety. But there was always a hint, a shadow of something far more dangerous lurking just beneath the surface. The first signs of something going terribly wrong were subtle at first. In the wake of Paracelsus' increasing obsession with immortality and the forbidden arts of alchemy, rumors began to spread through the quiet towns. At first, they were dismissed as mere superstition, as people are prone to do when faced with things they don't understand. But as the strange events unfolded, no one could ignore the growing sense of dread that clung to the air like fog. It started with the marks, strange, unnatural symbols that appeared on the bodies of those who came into contact with Paracelsus' experiments. At night, townsfolk reported seeing flashes of light from his laboratory, followed by the unmistakable sounds of something unnatural. Some claimed that the marks resembled symbols from the ancient alchemical texts Paracelsus had been obsessively studying. Others said they were more like burns, scorched skin, as if touched by something far hotter than mere fire. But marks were only the beginning. Soon after, the first unnatural births were reported. Villagers who had long trusted the land for its bounty found themselves giving birth to children with strange deformities, pale, sickly babies with skin that seemed unnaturally cold to the touch. Some had too many fingers, others had extra limbs, and still more were born with eyes that seemed to gleam with an unsettling, knowing light. The midwives, once respected and trusted, whispered to each other in fear. They could no longer explain the unnatural twist of fate that seemed to plague the newborns. The sickness followed close behind. Children grew ill with no apparent cause. They would wake in the night, crying out for reasons no one could understand. Some would stare into the dark, speaking to figures no one else could see, their voices shaking with fear and confusion. Some villagers claimed the strange births were merely coincidence, but others suspected otherwise. These babies, these sickly, marked children, seemed to be marked by something far darker, a force that began to stretch its reach beyond the boundaries of science and into the supernatural. The air grew heavy with suspicion as eyes began to turn toward Paracelsus. Was he truly trying to conquer death, or had he opened a door that could never be closed? The alchemist's work was no longer a noble pursuit of a knowledge. It was something far more dangerous, something that brought death and decay in its wake. That was only the first crack in the story. As the days passed, the air in the village thickened with unease. What had once been a quiet, peaceful place began to rot from within, as if someone had poisoned the land itself. The early signs of strange occurrences were brushed off as misfortune, but soon the whispers grew louder, and fear began to sink its claws into the hearts of the villagers. It wasn't just the children with unnatural marks, or the sickly newborns that sparked the fear. The world around them began to behave differently, unsettlingly so. Livestock started to die without explanation. One by one, the cattle, goats, and chickens of the village began to fall ill. Their once strong bodies withered overnight, their eyes dull and glazed, as if their very life force had been drained away. The farmers, who once prided themselves on their livestock, found themselves unable to save them. No medicine worked, no cure could be found. They were left with empty stables and terrified eyes, the stench of decay hanging in the air like a foul omen. But the tragedy didn't end with the animals. Crops, too, began to fail. Fields that had once been lush and green with wheat, barley, and vegetables now lay barren. The soil, once rich with life, turned ashen, the plants withering before they could even fully bloom. The villagers could only watch as the land, their very lifeblood, betrayed them. They prayed to their gods, offered sacrifices, and begged for mercy, but the earth refused to answer. Yet it wasn't just the land that had turned against them. It was the very night itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a chilling darkness would fall upon the village. But this was no ordinary nightfall. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, twisting and contorting into unnatural shapes. People began to report seeing figures moving just outside the edge of their homes, shapes too tall, too thin to belong to anyone they knew. The whispers of the townsfolk spoke of unnatural movement, figures that were never quite human, their eyes glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. And always the sense that they were being watched, even when they were alone. The village that once thrived with life now seemed suffocated by something they couldn't understand. Neighbors who had once been friends began to turn on each other. Suspicion spread like wildfire. Some believed Paracelsus' alchemy had cursed them. Others whispered darker tales about witches or demons creeping into their world. The lines between reality and nightmare were becoming indistinguishable. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Every rustling leaf in the wind sounded like a whisper. The fear reached its boiling point one night when the village gathered in the town square, their faces pale, eyes wide with terror. A loud crash echoed through the night, followed by a desperate, muffled scream. No one knew what happened, but when they reached the source of the noise, they found one of their own, dead, their face frozen in a look of pure horror, and their body twisted as if broken by an unseen force. There were no signs of violence, no footprints in the dirt, just a single, unmistakable mark, a symbol burned into their flesh, a symbol that matched those found on the bodies of the strange newborns. The community knew. They knew, deep in their hearts, that something was deeply wrong. The peace they once enjoyed had been shattered. It wasn't just bad luck or a streak of misfortune. It was something far darker. And now, the shadows weren't the only thing moving in the night. And from there, everything grew darker. As the darkness of the village deepened, the people grew desperate. Fear had taken root in their hearts, and they knew something unspeakable was out there, lurking, watching, waiting. But what could they do? What was left to protect themselves from something they could neither see nor understand? In a frenzy of panic, the villagers turned to ancient remedies, hoping to ward off the evil they could feel creeping in. They scoured old books and whispered to the elders, looking for any trace of forgotten rituals that could save them. The first sign of desperation came when garlic was hung at every doorway, its pungent smell a feeble attempt to keep away the unseen. It was said to repel evil, but the villagers knew, deep down, that garlic alone wasn't enough to protect them. Yet they clung to the hope that the age-old rituals might hold some power. They also sprinkled salt in their homes, drawn from traditions meant to ward off evil spirits. It was said that salt could create a barrier, preventing dark forces from entering. The villagers began to line their windowsills, sprinkle it around their houses, and even carry small bags of it wherever they went. But the salt, like the garlic, seemed to do little more than offer a false sense of security. The forces at play were too powerful, too mysterious. As the nights grew colder and darker, the villagers gathered in secret. Sacred nights were declared when no one dared leave their homes after sundown. The women whispered prayers and recited charms handed down through generations, while the men sat vigil by their doors, weapons in hand, awaiting a threat they could not name. But it was not enough. No amount of salt, garlic, or ritual could stave off the gnawing feeling that something more terrible than they had ever imagined was waiting for them. The village square, once filled with the sound of children playing and merchants shouting their wares, now stood eerily quiet. The villagers gathered in hushed voices around the fire, plotting ways to fight back, ways to stop the horrors from spreading. Some spoke of burning witches' marks from the bodies of the dead, while others whispered about dark pacts that could grant them the strength to defeat whatever was haunting them. Yet even as they spoke of resistance, a part of them knew it was all futile. No matter how many rituals they performed, no matter how many signs they sought, the curse was spreading, and they couldn't stop it. Still, they tried. Desperation had made them turn to darker measures. One night, a small group gathered in the woods outside the village to perform a secret ritual. They believed that by calling upon an ancient god to protect them, they could force the evil back. But as they began chanting in the cold moonlight, the air grew thick and oppressive. Their voices faltered, fear creeping into their hearts. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, a sound like low thunder, deep and rumbling. The trees swayed violently as if pushed by some unseen force. It was then that they knew whatever they were facing was beyond their control. It was not a creature, not a simple curse, but something far older, far more powerful. And as they stood in the midst of the ritual, the ground trembled beneath them, and the distant shadows seemed to stretch even further. The true horror revealed itself. The measures they had taken, garlic, salt, prayers, had been desperate attempts, and they knew now, too late, that none of it would be enough. That moment opened a door that should have stayed closed. As the darkness of the village deepened, the people grew desperate. Fear had taken root in their hearts, and they knew something unspeakable was out there, lurking, watching, waiting. But what could they do? No longer could they turn to the familiar comforts of daylight or reason. They were up against something far beyond their understanding. In a frenzy of panic, the villagers turned to ancient remedies, hoping to ward off the evil they could feel creeping in. They scoured old books and whispered to the elders, looking for any trace of forgotten rituals that might save them. But the more they searched, the more they realized how fragile their safety had always been. The first sign of desperation came when garlic was hung at every doorway, its pungent smell a feeble attempt to keep away the unseen. It was said to repel evil, to ward off spirits, and protect the living from harm. The horror they were facing was not something so easily kept at bay, yet they clung to the hope that these age-old rituals still held power. Then came the salt. Salt was sprinkled generously into the homes of every villager, creating invisible barriers around each house, in every corner, along windowsills. Salt had long been believed to possess purifying powers, used in rituals to cleanse evil spirits and mark boundaries that no malevolent force could cross. As the nights grew colder and darker, the villagers gathered in secret. Sacred nights were declared, nights when no one dared leave their homes after sundown. As twilight descended and the cold mist crept from the forest's edge, the villagers huddled inside, lighting candles and praying fervently. The women whispered prayers and recited charms handed down through generations, while the men sat vigil by their doors, weapons in hand, waiting for a threat they could not name. The firelight cast long, twisted shadows on the walls as the world outside grew silent, save for the occasional gust of wind that rattled the shutters. But it wasn't enough. No amount of salt, garlic, or ritual could stave off the gnawing feeling that something far darker was coming. The villagers gathered in hushed voices around the fire, plotting ways to fight back, ways to stop the horrors from spreading. Some spoke of burning witches' marks from the bodies of the dead, as if fire could cleanse their very souls. Others whispered about dark pacts, sacrifices, and forbidden rites that might grant them the strength to defeat whatever haunted their land. But as they spoke of resistance, a part of them knew the truth. It was already too late. Still, they tried. Desperation had made them turn to darker measures. One night, a small group gathered in the woods outside the village to perform a secret ritual, hoping that invoking the power of an ancient god might protect them. They believed that by calling upon something older than the dark force they feared, they could force the evil back. But as they spoke the words, the air grew thick, suffocating, and their voices faltered. Fear crept into their hearts. The earth beneath them began to rumble. It wasn't the tremor of an earthquake. It was deep, like a low growl, as though the very ground itself was awakening. The villagers stood frozen, the chanting dying in their throats. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, a sound like low thunder, deep and rumbling. The trees swayed violently, as if pushed by an unseen force. It was then that they knew whatever they were facing was beyond their control. This was not a creature, not a simple curse, but something far older, far more powerful. And as they stood in the midst of the ritual, the ground trembled beneath them, and the distant shadows seemed to stretch even further. The true horror revealed itself. The measures they had taken, garlic, salt, prayers, had been desperate attempts, and they knew now, too late, that none of it would be enough. Because some of the dead refused to stay buried. The earth cracked open, and from the depths, something stirred, something not alive, but not dead. A twisted creature rose, stitched together by forces that should never have been awakened. Its eyes glowed with an eternal hunger, and it moved like a shadow, silent and cold. The village fell silent, frozen by the presence of what they had unleashed. Some say it still roams the land, its footsteps unheard, waiting for the door to open again. And if you listen closely enough, the whispers can still be heard in the dark.